Welcome to Ecologic for the month of March. Beautiful time of year. We just passed the spring solstice. Flowers are blooming everywhere. Just a beautiful time of year. We just went through the azaleas. They're just fading out now. The camellias just passed, and now the irises are blooming, and trees are sprouting all over, and gardens are sprouting out all over the area. So it's a beautiful time of the year for us. And we've had wonderful weather for the last few weeks. Congratulations to the people who made the 50-mile Bayou paddle with by the Vermilion District. I think they had a real good trip. A big wind in their face most of the time, but it's quite an experience to take a canoe trip of that awesome mileage and beauty. To go down to Vermilion is an entirely different perspective than driving along it in a car, to see the beauty of that waterway and the trees that are on it, the homes that are on it, and farmlands and all. It's just a beautiful trip. Good job by Vermilion District. We're fortunate tonight. We're having our topic tonight is Trees Acadiana, and we have the Vice President, former President of Trees Acadiana, Dennis Sullivan. We're coming up on the annual meeting Tuesday, but we want to go through the history of Trees Acadiana, some of our accomplishments, the goals, and then announcement about what the meeting will be. So Dennis, lead the way. Tell us a little bit about the history of Trees Acadiana.
Okay, Harold, Trees Acadiana, how I first heard about Trees Acadiana was people that were planting trees, and that's always been something close to my heart. I was raised in a family that valued trees and planted them whenever we had a new house. And I was a military brat. We moved a lot, and the first time I remember planting trees, we had monster oaks behind the house that we moved into, and it was a new neighborhood on the Ohio River outside Fort Knox. And I remember planting with my father and looking at the big trees out in the back and talking with him about how someday these trees would grow to some similar size. And it's always that concept that's intrigued me about the value of trees. So what we in Trees Acadiana try to do is value trees by planting them and honoring the ones we already have. It's a challenging job in the developing world, but I think we do a very good job of it. Our tree planting is mostly annually in the tree planting season, if you will, when it's colder. One tree planting is usually around the Arbor Day time, somewhere in January, third week, I think, in January. And we announce it as widely as we can. We scrabble around to get trees either by buying them ourselves with funds that we've raised, or by having them donated by, this year, donated by
Apache.
Yeah, Apache Oil Company that's been doing some balancing of their projects by planting in Acadiana. They've left us now, but they had enough ties back with us to continue and bought all of the trees that we planted this year. We did 2 plantings for the Arbor Day this year. There were both, the one was at Vermilion Acadian Village, in the back corner of that property where there's a new road that goes through there. Probably not new anymore, but right after the roundabout, we planted on that corner to give a little protection. So that was the first planting we did, all Apache trees. And then we did another planting in the back acreage of Brown Park on Pont de Mouton. And that'll provide a nice backdrop to the, to kind of cover the interstate a little bit in that area. So that's kind of how we got started and what we've been involved with. Both of those plantings, we always see an outflow of people who, again, for whatever reasons, it's parents with their children and families coming out, or singles or college students, quite a broad mix of people who come out for our Arbor Day plantings. And it seems like we're always concerned whether we'll have enough help. And then it's usually, did I get to plant a tree? Did I get near a tree? That's how many people are there at times. But we did a nice planting out there at Brown Park's back acreage. And all native trees is what we plant. And that's kind of the start of what what Trees Acadiana is about.
It started in 1997. Pierce Melton, a prominent architect here in town, always very concerned about saving the oaks, saving the live oaks, because it's hard to replace a 300 or 400-year oak. And thanks to his and Trees Acadiana's intervention, the trees that the Walmart on Pinnock were saved because Pierce called the architects up in Arkansas and, expressed his concern for preserving these old trees, and they did. And the same for about 10 live oaks at the Abbeville Walmart on Veterans Boulevard there on Highway 14. From over 21 years ago, there's been great efforts to try to save existing trees and plant more. And the goal is no net loss of trees. The trees are the lungs of the earth. They emit oxygen and take in carbon dioxide. We take in oxygen and emit carbon dioxide. So it's a balance, but super important that the trees are what cleanse the earth of its pollutants, air pollutants. And one growing tree will clean the air for 50 running automobiles. So you have an automobile in this country for every person. So a community or parish like Lafayette has right at 200,000 people. We have 200,000 automobiles, so we need lots of trees. And preserving the trees is something that is important. But there are some trees that have a life expectancy, like the water oak, which is very, very popular. It only has a 40-year life. So if you want to keep those going, you got to replant them. And some of the other trees, not all the trees are like live oaks that live to be 400 or 500 years old, or the cypress that probably are as much as 2,000 years old. So not all trees are that long-lived, and storms take a big hit on them. Then construction and roads and buildings and all of that takes its toll on trees, and some people just don't like them. So, but there's a very important need to follow this goal of no net loss of trees, because it has a big impact on our air quality and the air that we breathe. And it's not just, it's water conservation. The trees preserve groundwater. The trees are habitat for all kinds of wildlife, the food for birds and squirrels and deer and everything else. And it's a renewable resource. It's what we build our homes, our furniture, our violins and guitars, all made from wood that grows in our forest and so forth. So when you think about what all we know about space, if we could find one tree growing out on one of those weird planets way off in existence, it would change the world or the universe, what we think and know of it. Now, we take them for granted, but nowhere else in the universe have we found a tree. Trees Acadiana has had many accomplishments, and some of them involve preserving, for instance, the Youngsville oak. This was the first project. This is at the corner of Pinnock and University, by the police station across from the Protestant cemetery. His first project in '97. That was live oaks that were planted on that little berm, little hill, right at that Y intersection.
It's a good example. They were probably 10 feet tall when they were planted.
And looking at some of the oaks, the Foray oak
on UL campus.
On UL campus, that's
a prime example of somebody with a forward vision Dr. Stevens, was it?
Yes, he
Yeah.
planted at the turn of the century from seeds, from acorns, planted all the oak trees around that university. Carrollton and St. Charles Street in New Orleans, those were also the turn of the century, from the 19th to the 20th century. They were planted all over New Orleans at that same time that Dr. Stevens was planting them at UL. So those trees are 118 years old. And what a treasure, what a treasure. You can imagine UL without the oak trees around it.
Yeah, so think of where we stand in today's world and what we owe the people of a century from now. And that's basically what we're involved with Trees of Candiana. Let's tree the world in a place, in a way that our children's children will appreciate it as we do today. Have a vision.
These are trees around the Cajun Dome, I think, that were planted a few years later. A lot of these tree projects were in cooperation with Boy Scouts of America. Many of the projects were Eagle projects, boys working with Trees of Acadiana to plant a place on public land to enhance the natural beauty of the land, to put trees and so forth. So many, many positive things. This is the horse farm where one of the scouts from Troop 405 did an inventory of the 2,000 plus trees over 60-some different species, and there was one tree we couldn't identify. So
yeah, that was mustering. Us mustering on that foggy morning, getting ready to go out there with GPS
and identify. Yes,
and
we
worked,
thought. We thought it would take one weekend, and it took about 3 months. We guesstimated 500 trees, and it was probably 2,500 trees.
Yeah, on the right-hand side of this image, where the green corner is, that was our territory. And if you get back in there, watch out. There's some serious poison ivy in that area.
They have muscadines, muscadine vines that are like 10 inches in diameter. Places full of muscadines and just every kind of tree you can imagine. Beautiful pecan trees, cypress is kind of a hilly terrain, so there's a difference in elevation, and that changes the types of trees that it has tremendously. There's old homestead in there, so there's azaleas. This is one of the trees out in the open, one of the oak trees out in the open. This is the moving of Mr. Owl, where they moved this enormous oak tree along Highway 90 that was sitting right in the middle of the service road. They couldn't cut it down. They either had to move the tree or move the highway, and it was much cheaper to move the tree. That was 5 years ago. There it is going down Highway 90. Enormous tree, 300-year-old tree, being moved about 2 miles. It was set on the ground in the interchange on Highway 90 that goes to, I think goes to Weeks Island. Yes, it goes to the interchange that goes to the port in Weeks Island and People's School. That intersection is where that tree was placed. It's 5 years, and the tree is prospering and doing very well. And then there was a tree in Youngsville that was saved. Trees of Acadiana came up with the money to use a temporary 30-day road, put it across the street rather than cut down this very beautiful live oak tree right at that turn. That's George Rodriguez, who supported that effort. That was a news conference. That's the tree we're saving. Rodriguez did a painting of the tree. There it is. We still have some of the I think some of the copies of it that's available. They are signed. They're signed prints of the Youngsville oak by George Rodriguez, who contributed that. And that was where the money came from to actually move that street, that temporary 30-day road across the street.
And we try to bring the kids, and I mentioned that it was families on a lot of the Arbor Day plantings, but every year we go to the schools and we ask the teachers whether they would be interested in planting a tree with their class, or whether members of the class would like bare root seedlings. And these are some of the kids planting their own trees at their school, and it's usually something they enjoy quite a bit.
Each year in January, the Trees of Acadiana, at the request of the schools, get these trees to them. They can be citrus, they're native, they're oaks, and you name it. The schools ask for them. We do our best to get it to them and donate it. You know, you see it's the January planting. Everybody's got jackets on.
This is Moss Street, right, on the heading north?
Yes.
There's a lot of buildings in the back left there. I don't know.
This was an Eagle project. You
Yeah.
see one of the guys with a scout uniform on. That was planting live oaks on the Louisiana Avenue.
Pierce Melton
Yes, the Forest
Highway.
Memorial Oaks, yes.
Yeah.
There were 2 plantings. There's about 20 trees on the south side of I-10 on Louisiana Avenue, and there's about 20 on the north side. It's 2
Oh,
brothers.
and this is at the motor pool for the school board. We worked with the Lafayette Parish School Board, and they wanted some kind of a screening for this
Yes.
motor pool here. And that was designed by Jim Foray at UL, who has the ability to imagine the plants as they will look and properly place groupings of plants to do the job of beautifying an area and eventually covering up the vision of these school buses parked there.
Yeah, who all park there in the summertime when they're not running, you know, so. But the trees now, that's been 3 or 4 years ago, they're getting to be a nice size, so it's pretty much greened off the buses. They're getting
Good
up.
variety too.
Yeah. And it's
Uh,
always amazing how many volunteers show up to help with these projects, you know.
Is this BVD? Or, yeah, this is us planting the bare root seedlings that aren't given away of a year. And we get people to come out. BVD is kind enough to give us some acreage near the river there, down from Vermilionville, or downriver from Vermilionville, and we use whatever city compost, and there we are. Got a little tarp area there.
This is why we take seedlings and we put them in 3-gallon pots to give away at events like Festival International, Festival Acadien. They're free of charge. They're generally native plants. They're plants that will support wildlife, that'll prosper in our local climate and soils. We potted about 300 this the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, we've got that little activity down quite a bit now. But the repairing of we had a lot of damage from the frost, the freeze, to the watering system, so we're still working that. But supposed to have some rain in a few days, so we're getting away with it.
A bunch of these projects have been with Boy Scouts, and one of the things that have been done a lot with Boy Scout projects is to plant edible plants like citrus and figs and pecans, and in places like the Roy Park, at the at UL, at Alexandra Park. Yeah, we planted groves of citrus and other fruit-bearing plants on public land, and hopefully they'll bear fruit for people, the public, just to enjoy. I think they took a little setback with the real cold weather we had back in January. But hopefully they'll survive and prosper and keep going. So we welcome the volunteers who want to participate and help with planting trees throughout, Acadiana. We're not limited to Lafayette by any means. We've been involved in tree planting from all over the state almost. We did a big tree planting out on Hackberry Island. We planted about 1,000 trees after Hurricane Rita wiped out 100% of the vegetation on Hackberry Island. A year later, we planted about 1,000 trees that were wiped out by Hurricane Ike. and we went back and planted some more. So hopefully those are getting started and getting going. So sometimes it's frustrating in these projects that you don't always have 100% success, but it's so important that the effort goes forth, and most of the time the plantings are quite successful. We can drive down Pinhook and look at the scrawny little trees that we planted 15 years ago that are big, beautiful oaks right now. So you can drive around the community and constantly be in sight of projects that were put in place with volunteers, Boy Scouts, and UL students in some of these projects, and you know, the guidance and leadership of Trees Acadiana. So we have our annual meeting coming up. You might share with us what's going on with the annual meeting, because that's next Tuesday night at Pack and Paddle at what, 6:30?
No, it's 6 o'clock at Pack and Paddle, Tuesday the 27th of March. It's our annual meeting, so there'll be a short summary of our doings from the last year. And if our treasurer gives us a report, then we'll probably report on the dollars and cents of the organization. In addition to that, we've invited a number of people who've been kind enough to commit to come out and speak to us. Kathy Gilbert with the Consolidated Government's Planning Department is going to come, as is Abby Judy's, a member of the team over there in the Planning Department. Kathy to give a broader overview of the city and how they're looking at the preservation of our trees and of our landscape, and what rules are in place, what kind of guidance we have to the people of the city. And then Abby with a specific project that she's up to now. We'll have Stafford Barnett from Scenic Lafayette come to summarize what's going on with Scenic Lafayette. And then Heather Warner Finley with the Acadiana Native Plant Project. All of these people will give short summaries starting around 6 o'clock. You can come a little earlier. We usually try to bake some cookies or have some Kool-Aid or something, so you can break the fast a little bit. And then we'll be having a short meeting. That's the meeting this
Will we
Tuesday.
have any trees to hand out at that event?
I don't see why not. It depends on whether we cart them over from.
Well, yeah, it's not very far. So we'll have a few trees available if somebody wants to pick up a tree or two. We potted about 300 of them last Tuesday, so they're in the pots, watered, they're sprouting, they're looking real good. We have some left over from last year that look pretty good. So we'll certainly have some available if you want to come to the meeting and also take home a tree or two. Some of the easy things to do to keep trees going around your area is, you know, when you go camping or you go hunting or something like you're out in the woods or you're just going hiking in the woods, bring a few acorns with you. You know, acorns probably or some are still available, but it's something to do. You know, from any time in the winter and fall, you're out in the wilderness, bring acorns with you. And what you do is you scratch the leaves back to bare soil, you drop 3 acorns, you step on them, and then put the leaves back over them so the squirrels don't come find the acorns. And that's give you almost 100% success. And we took this from the hunters around Franklin would go into the wildlife management area around Franklin, in the Chapelai Basin, and all through that area. The basin has lots of trees, but not many trees that produce acorns and food for squirrels and so forth, wood ducks. And they're scarce and hard to find, but in that wildlife management area near Mead Point, all those islands and everything, and the hunters, squirrel hunters and deer hunters have been bringing a pocket full of acorns, and they come back with empty pockets. And so all through that system you find these beautiful live oaks sprouting and growing, water oaks, some of the red oaks and some of the white oaks, and whatever people find around their yards, they take them, and that's a no cost, easy to do that enhances, the trees diversity in the shelf life and the food supply for squirrels and birds and everything that feed and need those resources to survive. Something really easy to do. The trees we have are available free of charge. We give them out at the Festival International. There's an information booth at the corner of Jefferson and Vermilion, and the trees are available there. And for the full 4 or 5 days of the event. Also at Festival Acadiana Creole, we give out trees for that event, as well as other events that are in the community that deal with gardening and so forth. So easy to get involved. We meet once a month. If you want to be a part of the group and become a little more active, we welcome the volunteers and help from any sort of resources that have the time to try to make this area a lot prettier place. You can go to all the economic development spots, meetings and conferences. They come up with 2 solutions. One is clean it up and 2 is beautify it. Well, there's no better way to beautify an area than with trees, and especially the native trees that do so well here, the live oaks and the various species that do so well here, red oaks, water oaks, even water oaks. They grow real fast. They're a beautiful tree, and they have a 40-year life, but they provide a lot of resources in their 40 years. So, any thoughts about how people can get involved? We do announce over the internet when we have a tree planting and we need the volunteers. So often people say, well, I don't have a place to plant a tree. You think about it, probably there's lots of places you can plant a tree. Maybe at midnight in your neighbor's yard, but and there are many public places that you can plant a tree.
Or it could be as simple as being aware of something that's bothersome to a tree. I was thinking of a large magnolia that we had behind our house off West St. Louis, and the tree was obviously not doing so well. So I mentioned Jim Foray before, and I heard he was a tree guy. I had not met him up to that point, and I just called him up, and he said, sure, where do you live? And he came out to look at the tree, and he said, well, Dennis, basically this tree's not getting enough water. You see that most of the area around it has been developed, and it's concrete here, it's concrete there. There's very little surface area that this 80-foot magnolia can find the ground to have, find porous ground to get water. And I said, well, Jim, what can I do? It's such a magnificent tree. And he said, well, what you could do is you can, carefully drill holes in a grid underneath the tree, and then drop gravel, large rock gravel down in there, and then put the dirt back up over the top, and it'll create little wells of water reservoirs for it. And I thought, that sounds doable, but won't I harm the roots of the tree? And he said, you'd be surprised that you won't hit that many of the roots. You just come out radially from the tree and go down about 2 feet and drill a little hole about 6 inches around, 6 or 8 inches, whatever the post hole digger we rented were, and drop these rocks in, and it was like night and day what it did for that tree. So there are trees everywhere in the urban environment that may be suffering from their situation. They just need to have the right perspective, the right thought placed into what their problem might be. And you county agents, there are all kinds of people that are ready and willing to help. City probably has tree experts. Just call around and find check with the owner and then go from there.
You on there? Can we help you?
Yes, you can. A few years back, we did a big search for the top 10 oak trees, live oaks, in the Acadiana area. And Trees Acadiana has been talking about reviving that search and seeing if anybody's found any others to beat it. We'll end up putting that on our Facebook So check it out. Check the sizes of it. Come learn about it at our annual meeting this next Tuesday, and help us move on for the search for large oak trees. You know, they live the longest. They are the biggest living things on this earth, and we need to treasure them and take real good care of them. We may even do a big riding tour to check out all of these oak trees. So keep tuned in to Trees Acadiana.
All right, great. And it sounds like you volunteered to spearhead the revived 10 top oaks of Acadiana. When we did that several years ago, there were many people that came up, oh, you missed this tree, you missed that tree. And there's one over we looked at near Palmetto Park, this magnificent. It stands alone in a meadow, and it's 27 feet in circumference. The limbs have gone back to the ground.
Where is
it's
Palmetto Park?
Palmetto Park is in the main parish, right off the road to Intercoastal City.
Okay.
Just east of the road, about a half a mile, going towards Palmetto Park. Magnificent oak. It was never mentioned in the top 10. In the stand near Lodges, north of Lake Penier, there's an enormous oak there that somebody said it was much the biggest oak in the area. And so we have, it'll be fun to revive that, since when we did that and we listed the 10, we got many responses that you missed this one, you missed that one. And so it's an opportunity to revive that and revisit those treasures of Acadiana. When you look at, we don't have mountains, and you look at a tree like the Cathedral Oak, which we almost lost about 15 years ago. The leaves were the tree was becoming bare. We consulted Dr. Foray. One Boy Scout says he's going to try to save the oak. And what Dr. Foray at UL said was that there's so many visitors to the oak and people walking around under it that they had pounded the ground under it into a concrete consistency where nutrients would no longer go to the tree. So one, they had to stop all the traffic underneath, and two, they needed to get some medium to transfer nutrients under the tree. So we ended up planting ferns all over under the tree. The tree was fenced off, and the tree has been prospering ever since. It just looks beautiful. It's beautiful and green now, and that's because somebody said we can't let this tree die. We're gonna. And a young Boy Scout saying, and he got the cooperation of the whole school, the Cathedral Carmel School. When they planted those ferns, they must have had half the school there helping to save that beautiful treasure of Lafayette. You have tourists come to Lafayette, they want to see the cathedral and the Cathedral Oak. That is a real treasure, and somebody wouldn't let it die, and the help of the university and a lot of young kids, they did what was necessary to save that tree. That meeting is an opportunity to learn about the treasure that we have in Acadiana. The Sierra Club has a registry for cypress trees. What do they call it? The cypress registry. And it's to register the trees that were here when Louisiana Purchase was put in place in 1803. And so if a tree is around, I guess that's close to 200 years, trees were around then there's a registry that you can put in place to measure the tree, to age it. And the tree is aged. A lot of these old cypress trees are aged by taking a circumference measurement and doing a boring. And a lot of these trees are hollow, but you might have a foot or two of boring, which gives you the approximate growth rate of the tree. It gives you so many growth rings per inch. And so based on the circumference, you're going to come up with a diameter. You come up with a radius and determine the age of the tree. We did that to 10 trees in Lake Dotreve around Lake Falls Point Park and registered these trees. And 6 of the trees were over 1,500 years old, according to our measurements. So we don't think we had the oldest. So some of the trees that are around in the basin at Lake Falls Point, Lake Dotreve, probably were alive when Christ walks the face of this earth. So this is an enormous treasure to our area and certainly should be preserved and protected. But to register these things is a very good thing to do. It doesn't give them any kind of preservation status, but it identifies where they are, the size of the tree, and allows others to go visit that tree. So these things are real positive for our area. I remember one of the tree projects the Scouts did was to inventory the trees at Gerard Park. You on the air? Can we help you?
Yes, I want to also point out to you that there is a beautiful cypress tree on the ULL campus. It's located behind B.O. Hall of the biology department there. It's a Montezuma cypress. It is huge. It is gorgeous. And I understand that Dr. Savoy said, you will not cut that tree down. And they've taken parking lot space out, and I think they're getting ready to move and rebuild greenhouses that the trees' roots are interfering with. I think the greenhouses were out of date and needed to be redone anyways, but they're being moved over, and we are saving that gorgeous cypress tree, the Montezuma cypress tree. I think it's the largest one they have in the state of Louisiana.
Wow. And they have Montezuma cypress, I know in the Austin area, some of the bayous and rivers in Texas, some of the oldest, largest cypress in Texas are the Montezuma cypress. And it's neat that we have that species here on the campus, and I wonder if that's grew naturally, if somebody planted it. It's kind of interesting history to look at those issues, how old the tree is, and if these trees could talk, what a story they could tell. And one of the interesting group of trees are the live oaks along near Perry, Louisiana. There's a line of very old live oaks on the Jim Bowie farm. And the trees are older than when Jim Bowie was there, so they were not planted by Jim Bowie, which would have been in the early 19th century. So they had to be planted before. And a lot of theories, some that the Indians planted them, but Indians probably didn't do that very much. They were certainly conservationists and cared for trees, and they weren't chopping them down for nothing, for sure, but I don't know if they planted trees like we do, so to speak. But the Native Americans could live in harmony with nature, and they've lived thousands of years in this area of the world, 13,000 years as far as we know, in South Louisiana. That predates the last ice age, and they certainly lived in harmony with nature all that time. And in a century or two, we managed to really mess it up. So trees are super important. We were out fishing out on the Gulf recently, back, must have been in July, August, and came across the mangrove trees at the mouth of the Chafly River, and they were seeding. So I brought back a bag of the seeds and sent the seeds to people in Terrebonne Parish, and there was a wildlife reserve manager in Texas. I sent him about 40 or 50 of the seeds, and I've potted some. I don't know whether they're going to make it or not, but we're trying to propagate the mangrove. Very important tree in our coastal zone. Be curious to see if they survive their last freeze, because they're not very cold tolerant. So trees are certainly available. I don't know if the state has that program of giving out seedlings. Do you know if they still do that?
No, it appears the last couple of years we've had to order our seedlings from outside the city.
The state had
outside the state, and even other native plants to native trees to Louisiana, they're grown elsewhere. The state hasn't been able to keep up with the, giving out seedlings like they used to, bare root seedlings.
the state would give them out every year, and they have shut down their nurseries, so I'm sure there's still Louisiana nurseries in place, but they're not run by the state. So it's one of those big budget cuts, and you wonder, wow. Forestry is a very important part of Louisiana's economy. Our forests are instantly renewable, so to speak. To grow harvestable trees up in Minnesota or up in Washington State or Montana takes 50 or 60 years. We can do that in less than a decade here. So it's you look at all the cypress that were cut. It was a crime that we cut down the cypress forest without replanting, and cypress take 40 or 50 years to grow, and it's just poor statement of caring, not caring about future generations. As we cut the trees, we should have left a few that would seed. We could have replanted as we cut. If we continued to do that, we'd still be harvesting cypress. They managed to do that in the Northwest, even it takes 40, 50 years to grow. They do reforestation. If they cut down X number of board feet, they plant trees to replace it. So it's all about sustainability, and we have a long history of disregarding that. And trees are part of that story, that we neglected to look to generations in the future. What the cypress swamp, you drive on I-10 when you go into Baton Rouge, you drive through a cut over cypress swamp. It could have, when it was cut, it could have been easily replanted. At the time, the trees probably would have survived and would be beautiful today. They were cut, in the 1890s to about 1930. That 35, 40-year period, they cut the trees out of the wetlands, out of this Shafly Basin. The last steam pull boats came out of the basin before the levees were finished. So hopefully we have a generation that cares a lot more. kind of tickling my throat.
Do you have any more water?
Yes, I do.
So remember that we're having a Trees Acadiana meeting next Tuesday night at 6 o'clock at Pack and Paddle. We'll have Kathy Gilbert with LCG Planning, Abby Judice from the same department, Stafford Barnett from Scenic Lafayette, Heather Warner Finley from Acadiana Native Plant Project, and Joe Katz to summarize the last year of Trees Acadiana's efforts. Everyone is welcome. Come a little early and have a cookie or two. Find a good place, and short meeting, informative. People that are interested in the preservation of trees in the area and taking care of our city and our in this entire part of the state.
It's super important that we have a federal program that, excuse me, let me drink a little water, that involves mitigation for wetlands loss, and it essentially is taking farmland, restoring it back to bottomland hardwood forest. And it is very beneficial to wildlife because they're planting native trees that produce acorns and fruit, whatever, for wildlife, and that's been a very successful program, and it's very beneficial to the landowners. If you have farm property that is hydric soil, it means that it was once swampland, and you want to return it to forest, then there's a federal program that does that. There are contractors that can get you going with that. So your county agent can inform you about who would help you with that, what government agencies can help you. I know U.S. Fish and Wildlife been involved, especially as it relates to endangered species. There were 300,000 acres of farmland that were restored to forest just to enhance the recovery of the Louisiana black bear. So those are forestry programs that are on the federal ticket that are very beneficial to our air quality, water quality, wildlife. And again, it gets back where, you know, it's restoration of what was cut down. In the 60s, the U.S. government decided we needed to have more soybeans and cotton grown in the delta lands of Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and we really, under the federal ticket and with your tax dollars, we cleared over 20 million acres of forest and turned it to fields. Now the program's trying to go backwards on that. So, but if you're a landowner and you have soil that was once part of a swamp, and most people would know that, you can restore it back to forest. And there's lots of people will help you do that. Some simple things you can do. You know, you can have a goal of plant one tree a year, and if you don't have a place to plant it, just asking around, you'll find lots of folks that'll be willing to host a tree planting in their yard or on their farm property. You know, there are fence lines that, you know, could be enhanced tremendously with trees. There's nothing nicer than a vegetation barrier between you and your neighbors, and trees can be a real big part of that. And often neighbors are willing to cooperate with each other, and instead of putting a big gruesome fence that blocks the wind and all, to put a vegetation barrier that is soundproofing, it's shelter for wildlife, it's for the birds, that provides food and shelter for birds, and it beautifies your place. And you can look at a lot of the new home subdivisions in the country. There's a crying need for planting trees in those subdivisions to help with the burden of heat. A tree that shades your home is very beneficial in terms of air conditioning. You might want to plant a deciduous tree, like something that grows real fast. Our swamp tree, the sycamore, is one of that. It grows enormously quick. You can grow a big tree in 5 to 6 years and plant that on the south side of the house, and it will shade you very quickly in the summertime, and it loses leaves very quickly. So you have the advantage of the sun in the winter when you need it, and shading in the summer when you don't need the sun. So lots of opportunities to shelter your home in terms of lower air conditioning costs, lower impact on wind loads during a storm. You want to be careful you don't put a big tree that'll fall on your house. Very important that if you have dangerous trees, that you consult the state urban foresters. The state has a program that will send an urban forester out and look at a tree that you think may be dangerous. And if it is, it may need to be trimmed. It may need to be taken out. The worst for these are the water oaks that get very big, heavy, and dangerous as they reach the end of their lives. So you got a tree of that type, we hate to lose a tree, but it should be taken out. And amazingly, when you take a tree out like that, you put a tree right behind in that old stump site, and it grows like the dickens. And I can't tell you why it does that, but it seems to be the ideal spot to plant a new tree. I have done that on several occasions and just been just amazed at how much quicker that tree grows into the old rotting root system of a water oak that had to be taken out. So it's all about making the world a little better for your efforts in passing, and it's trees are the gift from the Almighty. You go to places like West Texas where there are no trees, and you think, wow, how can they live in this area with no trees? We're so blessed in our area where you plant a tree, you can have a 99% success rate of completing and getting a tree growing, and you can mess up and foul up and the tree will still grow. You want to plant a tree out in the pasture, you just put a stake. And, some bird will go sit on that stake and drop the seed from a chicken tree. And you can, reforest the whole area just putting stakes out in an open field. Nature's a wonderful thing.
And if you grow chicken trees, you'll have the change of foliage in the fall.
Yeah, that's an invasive tree. People tend to hate them, but they produce a lot of food for wildlife. They're a beautiful tree. They grow real fast. They turn red in the fall, so they're not all that bad. And when we talk about if you live along the bayou, it might be better to plant trees than to put a bulkhead. The cypress trees along the edge of the bayou will tolerate high water levels, will build a root system that'll far outlast any bulkhead you can put. And of course, it's much prettier. And of course, cypress will grow just like willow. You can just take you don't have to buy seed cypress. You can just take clipping of a growing cypress tree and stick it in the mud at the water line. It'll grow. It's a clone of the tree you took it from, but they'll grow just like a willow. Willow trees, you can grow those real quick, real easy. You can take a 1-foot sprout, 1/4 of an inch size, and go put it in the mud line and have a whole willow forest. They really plant mangroves that way, the same way. Vietnam, when the deforestation took place, the trees were replaced by a lot of Vietnamese students doing just that, with mangrove and willows, planting trees in the wetlands areas of Vietnam and restoring the forest that had been denuded by defoliants. So we're very fortunate. We have the climate that allows trees to go quick and fast. Even a live oak grows pretty fast. 10-year-old live oak can be a really large tree. So again, we're going to have trees available at the meeting if you want to come and grab a tree or two. They'll be available at Festival International, which is only about a month away, and they're free. All we want is a commitment from you to plant them. But taking a tree in a pot, even a procrastinator has 2 or 3 years to hang around before deciding to plant a tree.
Yeah, the only thing you have to do is keep the root ball periodically watered. And
well, if you leave it outside, it'll do it by itself.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And just keep an eye on it so it doesn't really dry out, and let the regular rains do the job for you. And then when it's a good time in the fall and into the colder time, when the trees concentrate on their root building, then it'd be a good time to get it in the ground. Whether it's, like Harold says, it doesn't have to be this year, but one of those years. And I'll have a friend already selected and has been living with you for a while, and there you go, treed.
Yeah, and there's nothing greater than to see a nice tree growing and just full of birds and wildlife and squirrels inhabiting it, and the shade that it provides, and that shelters your home from the hot sun and the brisk winds from a storm. So real important that you take care of the trees you have and replace them when they do go bad or when they invariably have to be taken out.
I ran into a person who was at the Cajun Dome planting, And we had both been there, my family and her family, and we'd been around planting on some of the same trees. And we mentioned it was an experience that we shared and that we had shared with our families. And every time we go back and look at how amazing those trees are in that parking lot now, and think of the shade that they'll provide for parked cars of a day, and how much nicer they make our city. It doesn't take much, just a vision for a nicer future, a more treed future. And all you have to do is get involved. That's all it takes.
In St. Bernard Parish, after Hurricane Rita, there was one of the communities wrecked, and it had beautiful boulevards, and they had planted with azaleas and camellias, and the storm surge killed all those completely. But they noticed that their citrus trees survived. So they dug up the azaleas and camellias and replaced the whole neutral ground throughout the city with oranges and grapefruit, satsumas, and it's been a wonderful success story. You know, the town is full of grapefruits and oranges for 5 or 6 months a year. People don't abuse the opportunity. You know, there's no reason to take, you know, a 10-gallon bucket. You just take what you need. As long as they're on the trees, they're okay.